Regulator, mount up. We're coming.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here. And yes, I am back at home from the NFL Combine. And yes, I know the Combine is just starting with the players getting on the field, but all the coaches and general managers have done their talking. And I did, I think, 12 podcasts with a lot of different guests over the last couple of days. Sorry. And so make sure you go check all of those out that I did from the Combine. But it's always been better for me to come back home and watch on TV with you and listen to Daniel Jeremiah and the reporters there talk about everything that's going on at the Combine with the workouts. That's much better for me than sitting in the stands at Lucas Oil Stadium and not knowing a lot about a lot of these players. So just today, I was lucky to fly home on a plane that had a TV with NFL Network. So as I'm flying home from Indy, I'm listening to Daniel Jeremiah talk about Derek Harmon, who has become now a name that I think everybody has to know after the Combine in connection with the Minnesota Vikings, but also a lot of other defensive tackles as well, the defensive linemen, and also the news that's constantly coming out and updates on free agent situations with Ian Rappaport. When he's not getting in altercations at Starbucks, then he is giving us the insight into what's going on, which is the place to begin tonight's show. And two quick things. This is an Ask Me Anything Combine version, so get in the chat, ask me any questions that you got, whatever you want to know. I am here to answer back from the Combine, whatever I've come up with, whatever discussions you want to have, throw those questions in the chat, and we will have a really good discussion about the next couple of weeks for the Minnesota Vikings, which will tell the story. The other thing is, I've been talking to people for several days straight and podcasting, and my voice is a little bit on the edge tonight. So I've got my trusty Diet Dr. Pepper, but some forgiveness for that and my general exhaustion might be required. So I appreciate that. And also, I just want to shout out, before I get to your questions and the Trey Smith situation, a producer for Purple Insider, Jonathan Harrison, who was an absolute trooper this week, getting up all 12 of those podcasts that I ripped off onto YouTube and producing it and helping me out technologically and everything else so much this week. Invaluable. Purple Insider couldn't exist without him. So I just want to say a thank you on the show here. Now let's get to Trey Smith. So the report is today that Trey Smith, the apple of the eye of all Vikings fans, the one guard who could change everything, is apparently going to be franchise tagged. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to play for the Kansas City Chiefs next year. It just means that he's franchise tagged. They could also do exactly what the Vikings are talking about doing with Sam Darnold, which is to tag Trey Smith and then trade him away. Knowing the amount of interest around the NFL in Trey Smith, just Google him and you'll see all these different teams saying, their media saying, oh no, Trey Smith, we had written him in as the Texans or all these other teams, the Packers, everybody else, everybody had Trey Smith as being their top signing. But instead, he gets franchise tagged, and I think one team will step up and make a trade for him, especially with the extra cap space. And this is where it does come into play. Because I had seen some people, and I've been asked on the show, like, hey, doesn't more cap space mean the free agents will just ask for more money? And to some extent, the answer is yes. But the franchise tag is based on all the previous contracts. So suddenly, when you trade Sam Darnold to another team, instead of taking up 18 or 20% of the cap, it takes up like 14% of the cap, which might be easier for them to deal with. That's a couple players right there. And the Kansas City Chiefs might be thinking the exact same thing with Trey Smith. Why would we let you walk out the door now and hope to get a third round comp pick next year? And I always say hope because there's no guarantee, because comp picks are based on a formula with your spending and what left your team. And this is why it's so important for the Vikings to find a suitor to tag and trade, because we don't really know what this will be worth in terms of Sam Darnold's comp pick next year. Oh, and by the way, you also have to wait until the next year. So if you're Kansas City, you're tagging him, it's $23 million or something like that. Someone will pay it, and then they'll try to work out an extension with him the same way that the Vikings traded for TJ Hawkinson, knowing that they were going to work out an extension for him. So I think that that's Kansas City's plan. They could also cut Joe Thuney, and that's a part of, we make all these free agent lists, and then all of a sudden we get to the NFL Combine, fascinating coincidence, and all of a sudden we see Rappaport and Schefter reporting, this guy's out there for a trade. That guy's out there for a trade. The team is giving him permission to go look for a trade. How nice of them. They're actually going to cut him. Almost no matter what guy it is. The only guy would be Matthew Stafford that they're not going to cut, or maybe Deebo Samuel that someone would trade for. But aside from that, players like Jonathan Allen, Jonah Jackson, their teams just don't want to cut them because it's not advantageous. It's better if they're able to trade him, which I'm mildly intrigued by the Jonah Jackson idea, but he hasn't really been all that healthy. The point being that, a lot of teams are trying to do, trades and things like that, and more players will become available than we think right now, right? More players will be free agents than are on the free agent lists, because last minute, when teams need to make some cap space to go into free agency, we're going to see players get cut over the next week that will become available that could add to the amount of guys that the Vikings could go after in free agency. But now, if Trey Smith is off the list, it's on to what's the answer. From this show's perspective, I have always been quite skeptical of the idea in general, because there was always that very realistic possibility that Trey Smith would just re-sign with the Chiefs because they're the Chiefs. And although they never do that well in the NFLPA survey, isn't that funny? Mahomes, I guess, would get A+, but the rest of the organization never seems to. Anyway, so there was always that very realistic possibility Trey Smith would stay there anyway. And I didn't love, and I still don't, the idea of paying one guy with the hopes that he completely revitalizes your interior, your line, as opposed to getting three guys. So if you give me $25 million, I want to look to get Will Fries. I think will probably get overpaid, but he's a name that's out there. Brandon Sheriff, Kevin Zeitler, there's a bunch of them who are options, which I'd like to see two, if not three, depending on what they want to do at the center position. I still right now expect Garrett Bradbury to be the center, but they could definitely make a change there if they were looking to improve in pass blocking. How much they can actually improve is a major question. And the fact that Bradbury knows the offense as well as he does would play in their favor for JJ McCarthy. I also will say, no matter how many times it comes up with Bradbury, I'd love to see him with two good guards for once in his whole entire career. Please get Garrett Bradbury some guards. Get the Vikings quarterback, their running game, get him some guards. So there are other guys that are out there that they're going to spend, I think, multiple free agents there, if not their first round draft pick, which is where a lot of intrigue comes in. Who's a center? Who's a guard? Who's a tackle? What position are they playing? Is this tackle going to be somebody who would immediately convert to guard and be an above average player there? Would there be more development, or is it just Tyler Booker or bust in the first round because he's the top name on the board from Alabama, a gigantic, mammoth, physical human being that I think the Vikings would be quite interested in? So how do they approach that? But I always had the Trey Smith idea as not Trey Smith or bust. If they signed him, I would have said, okay, well, off we go with the guards, right? But even when you look at his pass protection numbers over the years, is he worth being the highest paid player at that position? Is he worth 25 million versus shoring up the entire line? I never thought that that was really the case. So I think that they can make very big improvements with getting multiple players that are 10 to $15 million type of players at guard rather than just Trey Smith. And I have been consistent on this, so I don't want to hear you just coping now that Trey Smith is off the table, which, it's not 100% off the table. I just don't know what the heck the Vikings would trade for Trey Smith versus other teams that have a lot more draft capital if that's what Kansas City is really doing. There is another note that I wanted to bring up about Byron Murphy Jr. So Pat Leonard of the New York Daily News, sorry if I have the outlet wrong, but reported that the Giants are very interested in Byron Murphy Jr. And once again, this goes to, hey, your team's not the only team looking for corners in the free agent market. And the Giants desperately need to be better in their secondary. They were bringing back Adoree Jackson, I think, last year, and just struggling. And Murphy is, I think it shows you the top name or second top name on the market with the 6 interceptions that pushes him up. And likewise to Trey Smith, I have always thought very highly of Byron Murphy Jr. since he got here. I thought he was a key piece in 2023, but also have felt like if you're talking about $18-20 million, that's a lot. And that if teams are going to bid that high, the Vikings do have to have some sort of walkaway number with Byron Murphy Jr. If they overpay by a little, what's $3 million? What's $2 million for somebody who you really like, who's been part of your team and you can predict what they're going to do? Like, predictiveness is really a big deal. Like, that guy's health, how he fits in your system. You don't know that about someone else you're going out and getting. And so that's worth something. But I think the report that Byron Murphy is getting attention from the Giants is just emblematic that he's going to get a lot of phone calls because he's probably the best cornerback that is out there. And is he a shutdown, true number one superstar? No, that's not who Byron Murphy is. And I can just envision if he gets paid $17 million a year by the Vikings, you're going to have a lot of people who say, well, he's not that good. And I would agree, but that's how free agency works. You're as good as what someone's going to pay you. But if you go and you get corners who are much worse than Byron Murphy for cheap, well, that doesn't help either. And if you get guys who don't fit as well, that doesn't help either. And where that position ranks as far as in the draft is also a whole other conversation as well. If you have a guard, a defensive tackle, and a corner who are all pretty even on your draft board at number 24 or wherever you're trading down to, which one would you take? Or does the corner have to be way better than the guard or defensive tackle? How much do they think that position can be replaced? How much do they think that it is a huge impact position in this defense? I mean, I think you kind of go both ways with it. Like, yeah, Byron Murphy gets targeted a lot, but not a lot down the field because teams are dropping back quick and he's rallying to the football because of the blitzes and stuff like that. So his target numbers, I think, are a little overrated. Like, oh, he's targeted all the time and the best corners don't get targeted. Like, I get that. But if it's not deep targets and he's intercepting downfield targets or, knocking them away, I think that he's a pretty darn good corner. Is he the best corner in the league? Is he a top 5? Like, no, I wouldn't put him up there. And that if he gets paid like a top 10, but that's not where he is, then everyone's going to say, well, you overpaid. But again, it's just not how free agency generally works. So I'm kind of on both sides of the fence of that. I think they have to have a walkaway number because there are other corners like Carlton Davis and DJ Reed, who I like a lot. I really like DJ Reed as a potential option for the Vikings. But the other thing is too about Murphy, and corners are a little tricky with this. He's not that old as he hits free agency, where, again, actually, for the second time, whereas some of these guys are 28, 29, 30, and corners do have that same sort of thing as running backs, where when they get past 28, 29, 30, they don't have the same amount of juice as they had before. So I do think that DJ Reed is an option, Carlton Davis, that there's a lot of other types of corners that are out there that maybe they've got their eye on that Brian Flores likes that we don't know about. I think I may have mentioned Andrew Van Ginkel at some point last year as somebody that I liked, but I mean, he clearly had Van Ginkel as circled as his top guy who he wanted to bring in, or one of his top guys. There may be a cornerback version of that we just don't know about. I do know that the Vikings really like the way that Byron Murphy fits in their defense. I know they really like the way he fits in their locker room, and they're willing to pay for it, but they've just got to have a certain point where they say, all right, New York Giants, Byron Murphy is yours. We'll go and get somebody else. And that report kind of highlights that. So those are kind of the big takeaways for today, the big two news stories that are relevant to the Vikings. And nothing really in terms of movement on quarterbacks today. The defensive tackles looked great at the combine. A lot of big numbers. NFL, also their media just put out this thing. How do I describe it? Like an analytics home base to go in and look at all the numbers and where they rank and percentiles and all sorts of stuff that I will be messing around with a lot. But just from watching NFL Network on my flight home, my impression was that, this defensive tackle group is filled with a lot of different body types, a lot of different options, and some serious physical beasts. Cameron says Patrick Mekari is our guy. So Patrick Mekari might be a name that you should learn. He has played for the Ravens for a really long time. Not you, Cameron. You clearly know his name, but everybody else who doesn't know who Patrick Mekari is. He plays for the Ravens, and he's played every position for the Ravens, which does sound bad at first, but he established himself as a starter and has done pretty well, especially as a pass protector over the last couple of years. So he has got a lot of experience in a lot of different places, can slot in anywhere, can also act as a swing tackle if you needed him to go in and play for, Christian Darrisaw, because this year they didn't have a guy like that. And as soon as Darrisaw got hurt, it was just panic, and they had to go get Cam Robinson. But Mekari has had a good career with the Ravens, still in his prime, would be an average to above average potentially starter for the Vikings if they were to go out and sign him. I'm sure, like everyone else, he'll have a lot of interest. But yeah, I mean, he's a name that I think people definitely need to know. Topaz says that just eliminates scenario X from Kwesi's list. Let him cook. Yeah, if I don't even know. See, the thing about Trey Smith is I don't even know if that was one of their scenarios or not for the Vikings, whether they were interested. I think they probably were. And I'm sure, like everybody else, they had a price and they were going to try to get him here. And I can't overstate how much the Vikings have an edge when you have 3 years of data from the NFL Players Association survey saying the players inside TCO Performance Center love being there. And if you are a player trying to decide, hey, Arizona and Minnesota, they got the good offers for me. Let's see. What did their players think? Oh, Arizona gave their locker room an F-. So I think I'm going to go be a Viking. And I think we saw that last year. I think we saw it with Stephon Gilmore, that Stephon Gilmore had a chance to, I think, play with Carolina because he's from there and they were desperate for corners. And instead he visited the Vikings, decides to come here. Of course, they up the price tag for him a little bit to get him in the building. But I mean, I think a major part of it was just the environment that they've created. So if they were chasing after Trey Smith, they would have had a good chance for him. But now I think if it's a trade situation, it's much less so, and they're going to have to move on to different options. Evans says, are relative athletic scores out yet? Is RAS the biggest indicator of potential? I would not say that. I would not say, so what relative athletic scores are, you're going to see a lot of this, and the NFL.com analytics have a very similar type of thing that takes the combine scores and creates like a one number type of thing out of 100. So it's mathematically possible for the NFL to recreate kind of what RAS invented. So RAS is just a combination of all the scores from the combine from different events, and then it's made relative to importance for the position and weighted to give them one score. So if a defensive tackle runs a 5.1, it's weighted differently than if a running back runs a 5.1, then he wouldn't even get invited to the combine, right? So that's how it works. And I think that it's just one small blip in the entire picture of a player, but it can also knock some guys off the list. I mean, if you have a running back who scores in the 20th percentile, well, you're not really looking at something special there. But I also don't look at it as saying potential. And it's used that way, I think, way too often, because we've seen so many players who score high and are great athletes. I think it just says what's your raw athleticism, but that doesn't mean you can play football. And we've seen a lot of that. I mean, the Vikings drafted how many guys trying to emulate Danielle Hunter, and this guy from Texas A&M, oh, he's the next Myles Garrett. This is a great way to demonstrate it. From the relative athletic score based on the combine, yeah, this guy looks like Myles Garrett. I will bet you all the money in my bank account this guy isn't Myles Garrett. I mean, Myles Garrett has athletic skill that goes so far beyond this. Skills as a pass rusher. The guy can dunk a basketball through his legs. Like he can shoot threes. He's like a gifted sports player and technician and all that stuff beyond just underwear Olympics. And I think that what history has shown about that is that teams get fooled more than they succeed with things like RAS. I mean, they get fooled on guys like Trayvon Walker and not taking Aiden Hutchinson. The most important thing, and this has been studied, so as you watch the combine, just keep this in mind. The most important thing in terms of correlation from success in college to the NFL, you'll never believe it. It's production. It's production. If a running back like Jonathan Taylor runs for, I don't know how many yards he ran for, 2,000 yards at Wisconsin, pretty good chance that he could play in the NFL if he meets the athletic ability, right? Like the production in college, how it is the best thing for the NFL. So as you look at these prospects, I mean, yeah, you want freaks, but don't get overly wowed by that and say, oh, well, this guy was a little more freaky at the combine than this other guy who produced a lot more. So that's just something as you watch. What I like it most for, I mean, yeah, I love to watch when you see some 300-pound dude run a 4.8 or whatever. It's crazy. I just like to watch for the information. I respect the heck out of Daniel Jeremiah. I think he's the absolute best at getting research background, the eye that he has for these things. I mean, sometimes you'll be watching a drill and you're like, I don't know, I can't tell one guy from the next. And he'll point out, like, this is what this says about that player or how it's used or what we should be looking for. So if you're watching the combine, that's what to listen for, really, is Daniel Jeremiah's thoughts. And he was wowed by somebody like Derek Harmon, which is why he's got so much attention from me. But the kid, what is his name? Farmer from Florida State looked pretty good and was talked up quite a bit. There's a lot of them at defensive tackle. It's just Harmon has really popped for me. John says, is Matthew Stafford the first quarterback in the carousel to fall? That is a great question, and I wish I knew the answer, because you could look at it two ways as far as what Stafford means to this entire thing. You could look at it as, well, he's got to find his home first because he's going to be option number one for quarterback needy teams, and then everything else can fall into place. You could also look at it as everybody in the league probably knows that there's two teams that could get Matthew Stafford. And yes, whoever is left out of that party is going to be really desperate for Sam Darnold. But also, if you're not the Raiders or the Giants, if you're the Titans, if you're the Steelers, then you already know, hey, we're not in the Matt Stafford race. So let's go talk about Sam Darnold, and then it won't have a whole lot of relevance. I do think it becomes easier if Stafford went to the Giants, then the Raiders are next man up and they're right there, or the Rams. And it does add another team. So it makes it easier, but I don't think it has to happen if he is traded fairly soon. And you think about the timing of this thing, the franchise tag has to be put on Darnold in 5 days. So if the Vikings are putting on the franchise tag, and then not only that, but like a week after that is free agency. So in that week span, I think the Vikings would love to know, where's Matthew Stafford going, which teams are in on, they probably already know by now, in on a potential tag and trade if that's a realistic possibility. It does make it so much easier. There also might be some discussion already between the Rams and Vikings of, all right, once we get Stafford out, then Darnold's coming our way. But if Stafford is still a Ram after Darnold gets franchise tagged in that week after that, if he's still a Ram and we're still messing around with him going skiing with Tom Brady, well, then the Vikings just have to trade Darnold to wherever they can trade Darnold. And I think still there's enough teams that are interested in Sam Darnold that they will be able to do the tag and trade. That's my projection right now. We'll see how it plays out. We'll get that answer in just a couple of days. But so I think the answer is yes and no. It would be way easier if Matthew Stafford would just get traded to the Raiders tomorrow. Then again, I don't think it has to happen for the Vikings in order to be able to move Sam Darnold when they need to do it. And they really need to do it before they start getting contracts in. Because you could agree in principle, and this often happens, where they agree with a free agent to a contract and it's not actually signed for a little while later till the guy comes to Minnesota, puts pen to paper. And so we all celebrate the signing. Oh, look, they got this guy. All right, big, big move. And like he doesn't actually sign until he gets there the next day or whatever it might be. So it doesn't have to be that moment that as soon as it's agreed upon, then it goes on the salary cap. It doesn't have to work like that. So they could delay a little bit if they needed to and wait to trade Sam Darnold. But you really don't want to play that game of chicken. You want to tag Darnold and trade him immediately so that's off your books and it's all taken care of. And you can go into free agency with 2 giant sacks of money and you can say, who wants him? Who wants to be here with A+ coach, A+ ownership, A+ treatment of families? I mean, it is a holiday when that thing comes out for the Vikings. And I got to say, this is what I've always said about the Wilf ownership, that if my biggest critique of them in the past was that they always tried to win and didn't take a longer term vision, that's a pretty good critique because everything else, they hit out of the park with this franchise, and it gives the Vikings an opportunity to go into free agency and spend that money on guys that they know they can get. So I think that, just in general, as you guys being fans, myself objectively analyzing what this NFLPA survey has done is confirmed everything I thought. I don't cover all the teams, so I don't know what every single team's locker room is like and things like that. But I thought the Vikings had about as good as it gets as far as culture goes, and that just confirms it once again. Wade says, I hope Kwesi Adofo-Mensah repeats last year's free agency path, one step below the top glitzy names. Trey Smith is too much for one position. So how did last year go? I'm trying to remember how last year went. Like, who were the glitzy names? There was Christian Wilkins was a glitzy name, and he made $27 million a year. Jonathan Grenard had to be pretty high on the glitzy list because they signed 3 free agents in one day. If you're a day one free agent, that means you're pretty much at the top of the list. I understand what you're saying because Andrew Van Ginkel only made like $12 million a year, I think. It was, 2 years, 24 mil. So he wasn't necessarily at the top. Grenard definitely was. Hunter would have been higher. Kirk Cousins would have been the high, number 1 type guy. Grenard was probably 3rd or 4th, but Cashman and Van Ginkel would not have been 2 guys that at this time of year we were talking about, well, man, oh, wow, they really need them. And then we realized once we got into the games and saw them play, oh, actually, well, wow, they really did need them. So you're right, though. Savvy spending in free agency is a lot better than flashy historically. And there's not all that much flash in this free agency, which could be somewhat of the issue. Is like Trey Smith was the big flashy name, but the next tier down, there's a handful of guys who will absolutely be better than what they had in Blake Brandel and what they got the totality of the right guard position. I still think that Dalton Reisner did as well as he could have done and was a good pass protector, but not a difference maker at all in the run game, and didn't make people better in the run game either because of his physical limitations. So can you find some guys that can be a little more balanced, a little more effective in the run game, bring a little more grit to it, and pass block at a high level as well, yes, you can, but all of them come with, there is some downside. Like, just for example, like Will Fries, he has a pretty good history numbers wise. It's not amazing, and he got hurt last year. Will Hernandez has a really good history, but he got hurt last year. Kevin Zeitler is a wonderful player, but he's old. Same with Brandon Sheriff, who is not the same run blocker as he used to be, though. I wonder, Jacksonville, how good was their run scheme? Still, the Vikings isn't that great either. So all the ones that are not Trey Smith all come with a little bit of is this guy really going to completely change who you are as a team based on the interior? And that's why there might be an argument for them drafting someone as a guard in the first round, trying to trade down, take a early second round guard, get another third round pick, something like that. There's so many different options for the Vikings there, but having this one off the table, certainly not devastating, and was more along the lines of my plan in general for them, which was to get two guys in free agency for the same price, but they're going to have imperfections to them, even if they are an improvement. Matt says, feels like we started out the offseason with DJ Reed as the clear number one free agent corner. Doesn't seem like that's true anymore. Any idea why that is? I really think that when it comes to Reed, anybody who was in New York just got kind of buried. Reed is a great corner. He is a little bit older than someone like Byron Murphy, I think, and playing for the Jets, just irrelevant. Byron Murphy was on the big stage a lot. He was playing for one of the best teams in the league and got some key interceptions in huge games, like against the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday night. That's a national TV game. He had the one against Kirk that got highlighted and shown over and over again. And he really played well, though. You look at his numbers, he was a top 20 corner by PFF last year. And so that's not just interceptions, because they don't give a huge boost for the guy threw it right to you. So his overall play was good. And I think that he can be viewed as an ascending player where maybe DJ Reed isn't. But I honestly think that in free agency, a lot has to do with, just Trey Smith is an example of this. A lot has to do with how good was your team. If you were on a great team, you're going to get more attention than if you were on a bad team. If you're a real good player on a real bad team, you're going to get less. If you win the Super Bowl, you're going to get more. It's the fact of the matter. And that's what always scared me a little about Trey Smith anyway, which was that he's playing on this great team and you're going to get more attention. His numbers are good, and especially his run blocking is good, but is he worth that much? Would he be worth that much if he wasn't playing with Patrick Mahomes, with the Kansas City Chiefs, with a quick passing offense? If he's playing in a deep drop back offense, is he going to hold up? Or are some of those big whiffs where he's trying to be super physical going to eventually hurt him, which could be the case? Tyler says, I heard Josina Anderson report that Stephon Gilmore was present at the Combine. Does that mean he's not retiring? Is a return to Minnesota an option? And how do Harrison and Gilmore affect Byron Murphy and Cam Bynum? I definitely think that, I don't know about Gilmore. If he's at the Combine, that probably does mean that he wants another job and wants to keep playing. And maybe he is meeting with the Vikings, or it could be anything, though. It could also be, he's not really a media guy, but who did I see there a couple years ago? These guys have meetings sometimes that are totally unrelated with anything, but it just is going on at the Combine because that's where everybody is. So I don't want to jump to that conclusion necessarily that he wants to play again or that he's looking for somewhere else, because I saw, who did I see out there? Von Miller one year. He was just like the highest paid pass rusher at the time, and he was there doing some media stuff because there is a lot of media related to it. But Gilmore's not the biggest media guy. Maybe he does want to play again. I thought he was good for the Vikings. You're probably trying to look for better than Gilmore. And if Mekhi Blackman is coming back, where does he play? Would he want to be a rotational type of guy? Felt to me like he was great at the beginning of the season and then kind of wore down as things went along. It was a great signing, $7 million or whatever it was or $10 million for an entire season of quality play, was great. But I don't know if him being at the Combine means that he wants to come back or whatever else. But as far as that's not your question. Your question is, how do they affect the Vikings offseason? I mean, it certainly does at safety. I think probably more at safety, because my expectation was not that Stephon Gilmore was going to return to the Vikings anyway. I was assuming that he was either going to sign somewhere else as they looked for other options in free agency, or that he was going to retire. So he was already, in my mind, kind of not a Viking. Maybe that'll change. But Harrison Smith, definitely, because if Harrison Smith goes, then you could re-sign Cam Bynum and move Josh Metellus back to a regular safety position, which I say regular with finger quotes because Josh Metellus is not Harrison Smith. Most people are not, but he really does a lot of the same things already, which is moving up into the box. He's probably not going to be as good of a deep safety in playing the football as Harrison Smith. But again, that's like a Hall of Fame talent. So you can't really make that comparison, but being in command, being the real leader of that group, coming up into the box, blitzing, playing games with quarterbacks' heads, those are all things that Metellus can do. And that joker position maybe ends up being someone else that they develop, or a different linebacker, or Ivan Pace, or whatever they want to do with that. Or Theo Jackson would be in the mix as well. But they also could go into free agency and look around and see what the prices are, because when you talk about Cam Bynum, he is a deep safety who is super healthy and brings a lot of football IQ and a lot of great character to your room, and all that's worth it. But deep safeties are probably the most replaceable position on defense. We saw Anthony Harris do it. We saw Anderson Dejo do it. There are a lot of guys, and Theo Jackson, when he's had to step in, who can do that, who can play that deep safety spot. Bynum's been really good at it, but is it worth $15 million? It's the same question that we're asking all the time. But if Harrison Smith retires, and then you're talking about only having Metellus and Theo Jackson, and then going into free agency, if you can't get Javon Holland, the former Brian Flores draft pick in Miami, who's really good, well, you could get Trayvon Moehrig, you could get Justin Reed. Like, there's other options that are out there that are pretty good at that position that might be better football players than Cam Bynum overall. But it does add another thing to the pile of players you have to go get. If Harrison Smith comes back, maybe it's a little easier to replace that. I don't know. Yeah, it's you could definitely go one way or the other on that about how much it actually affects it. Because I think with Bynum, it is a math question too. It's how much is this position worth, that job worth, versus what he might get. It still comes down to that, whether Harrison Smith is there or not. Wrigley says Vikings can approach offensive line like outside linebacker, get multiple guys. Mekhi Becton is going to be off the list based on the assistant offensive line coach. This is from some reports out of the Jets. The assistant offensive line coach that they hired has a bit of a questionable reputation with some players in their opinions. I mean, you can look that up if you want. I have been kind of in the tunnel of focusing on the quarterback situation, everything else. So I can't give you every single detail on the assistant offensive line coach, but it is interesting to me. And I say interesting as in concerning that they hired someone that has a previous reputation as having been really hard on players. It doesn't really fit with the ethos of the coaching staff. And if they're hiring a hard ass because they feel like their team is soft or they're worried about that, I just think that's silly. I truly just think that's silly. What's going to determine how good you are is based on how much talent you have. It's not whether you need to be more mean to them or not. I know we need to be tougher on them. No, I hope that's not it. I hope that they hired him because they think he's got a lot of acumen on that line and they feel like he'll be a good fit in their coaching staff, and not to try to add some extra macho nonsense, because Jonathan Grenard's a really nice person and he's unbelievable at football. And so is Justin Jefferson. It has nothing to do with that, with being like a meaner person. So hopefully that's not it. But as far as Mekhi Becton goes, it seems like he's going to be off the list because of the New York connection there. But Ryan Kelly, Brady Christensen is definitely on my radar. I actually like him. He's from Carolina, and I think he was hurt though. That's the thing. A lot of these guys hit after they're hurt. But you're right, Wrigley. I agree with your overall assessment. Lots of good DTs in the draft. DT in the draft, all the money into the O-line. Don't mind that at all. Evans says, what about taking Tate Ratledge in the third? After watching DTs today, I really want to get Harmon, Walter Nolan. And I think Walter Nolan didn't do stuff today, but Darius Alexander, Toledo guy. Hey, you heard it here first. That was my first draft sim. Darius Alexander. I really just looked at his stats and thought they were really good. And like now he's kind of becoming a bit of a darling. CJ West from Indiana. Tyleik Williams is more of a run stuffer, but he's a huge run stuffer. Could be kind of that like Vita Vea type. What was the question? Oh, yeah, third round guard. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're taking a guard in the third, you probably are going to have to develop that player, which to me says stopgap like Kevin Zeitler or Brandon Sheriff, and then develop somebody to play there, because we saw what happened when you just draft a guy and you throw him in there and then you play him and you play him and you play him. And you're like, he's not getting better. So now what do? We just got to bench him and look bad. Like, I think you want to have, it's funny. We talk about quarterbacks as if it's the only position that should be treated this way. But I think guard should. I think guard should be the guy who gets a year unless he's super ready, a super high draft pick. I think those guys need to develop. But I don't mind that plan. I kind of like running back in the third. I also would kind of like to know how many draft picks they've got before we get there. In the draft, in our draft sims, we're trading away Darnold and we're trading down. We're getting 7-8 picks. And I kind of like the look of that. But right now, with only a first, a third comp pick, and then the 2 fifths, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room there. Because I think you want to get a running back before the 4th round. Historically, I know Aaron Jones was a 5th, but historically, there's only a handful of guys who, Pacheco, who have really been that 5th, 6th, 7th, but there's a lot of guys who are 2nd and 3rd rounders who become really good. Kamara was a 3rd rounder. Brett says people are undervaluing Darnold. I think we could get a 2nd and 4th out of him. If nothing else, a 3rd or 4th. We won't get a comp pick because of our free agent signings. Yeah, well, the comp pick thing, I just don't know. I mean, we don't know that formula because if they sign guys, but Bynum and Murphy leave, then it might even out. That's kind of how last year went. They signed a bunch of guys, but Hunter and Cousins left, so it evened out for them to get this comp pick this year. That's what you don't know. That's why you want to trade for that pick now. What I meant, Brett, when I said a 3rd was that's the lowest that you can possibly take. If you get it to a bidding war, like let's say that Matthew Stafford comes out and announces, you know what, guys, I love LA, I'm staying. And they give him a bunch of money to stay. Well, all of a sudden, I'm the Raiders, I'm the Giants. I can't go skiing with Matthew Stafford. What are we going to do? We got to give the Vikings a 2nd round pick for Darnold. Okay, so if you get some hysteria, but if there's only 2 teams and they're both offering 3rd rounders, just take what you can get the draft pick this year and move forward. David says, any chatter about potentially trading back? Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. This seems like the most reasonable way to approach the draft right now for the Vikings, because just at least the way that I look at this draft, and we're so early in the process, but we're starting to see it come together with the combine, right? That's when we start to put players into tiers. When do we expect them to go? And I look at that back end of the 1st round and the early 2nd as actually being quite strong. Does it have the next Bruce Smith, Reggie White, Deion Sanders, and Brett Favre? Probably not. But it does have starting caliber potential prospects in that back end at all the positions that the Vikings need. So if you can trade back and you can get an additional 3rd round pick or whatever it might be, then that would benefit the Vikings greatly with their lack of draft capital. And I don't think that they're falling off in a huge way from 24 to say 34, that even though those 10 players go by, how many are going to be in positions that they're not even looking at? They're not looking at wide receiver. They're not looking at quarterback. They're not looking at offensive tackle. And so if there's a bunch of those that are going to go from 24 to 34, well, it's pretty easy, right? I mean, you just move back if you can. But when we say this is the problem with moving back, when we say, well, they'll just move back, got to have somebody move back with. And it depends on who's there. If you have somebody graded in the top half of the 1st round who falls into that space. And you just think, well, we can't trade back. And it's kind of like, I think they wanted to trade back when they drafted Jordan Addison, but that was their guy. He was on the board. Go get him. And, you can't let that go by because they wanted a wide receiver from that draft class. So it's all kind of how it ends up playing out on draft night. But just in generally, overall speaking, yeah, trading back is a good idea. Quick moment of break for a ad read, since this show does have sponsors. I'm very happy and proud of that. And you know what? I participate with the sponsors a lot of times on this show. And the newest one here is Tempo Meals. So they have been sending me meals that you can heat up in 3 minutes in the microwave, which sounds too good to be true. But let's see. My recent delivery, I got tangy chicken, mozzarella chicken, and barbecue chicken. Can you tell what I was aiming for with my list? But there's dozens and dozens of different options for anything that you like. I just happen to like a lot of different kinds of chicken. So all they do, Tempo Meals, delivery service that has chef-crafted meals, dietitian-approved menu, fresh to your door. They're perfectly portioned lunches and dinners, takes the guesswork out of cooking and eating. And you know how I have been eating in my life with a lot of Taco Bell and so forth. So we'll try to do a lot less of that with Tempo Meals. So for a limited time, Tempo offering my listeners 60% off your first box. Go to tempomeals.com/Purple Insider, tempomeals.com/Purple Insider, 60% off your first box. Rules and restrictions may apply. Give that a shot, if you will. Now, give me a moment for a Diet Dr. Pepper break as well. The voice is holding up well, though. I'm happy. All right. Back to your questions. Hunter says, where is the value of this free agent class? I like Reed, but it seems like an overall weakish free agent class. Maybe it's a year to take a bigger cap hits for players under contract. Yeah, so the hard thing about it is when we talk about is it strong or is it weak, we're usually factoring mostly the superstar free agent. And T. Higgins at this moment and Trey Smith at this moment until the franchise tag is official. I don't think it's official yet. Those guys were the big fish of this free agency. And I think they were pretty much the only big fish of this free agency. The only guys where you went, man, if you get T. Higgins, that can change your franchise. If you get Trey Smith, that can change your offensive line. But I also go through the list and I go, there's a lot of players who can help your franchise. So there might not be somebody that you individually are spending $30 million on, but what if you're spending $12 million? This is kind of the Andrew Van Ginkel thing. $12 million a piece on 5 or 6 different players that are good fits for you. Where the Vikings are is, and I'm not saying they don't need more megastar talent because everybody needs megastar talent, but they have the players in place at the most important positions in the sport at a lot of different spots. So they have the quarterback in place. They have the number 1 wide receiver, maybe in the entire game, probably in place. They have a top-notch left and right tackle in place. They have an edge rusher who is incredible in place in Jonathan Grenard. And also Andrew Van Ginkel is under contract as well. They've got their leader of their defense going forward, which is Blake Cashman. That's a lot of foundational things to work with. And if you have those, I think we've seen that in recent years, that everybody else, all boats sort of rise around it. So you get some more development out of, and I should mention Hawkinson as well. I expect him to improve next year, but it's not like he was bad. So you have one of the better tight ends in the league. And so you got Jordan Addison, quality number 2. You got a lot of these foundational pieces to work with who have won a lot of games for them. Now you need to hit on a defensive tackle. You need to find corners. You need to find guards. But even if you don't get, if there's not Jalen Ramsey who's out there, which he's not, for them to acquire, but if you have good players at those positions, I think a lot of times in the NFL, and this is the Philadelphia Eagles, everyone's making it about their guard and their defensive tackle. But when I looked at their roster, I thought they don't have a weakness. It's not like they have a megastar at every single position. Reed Blankenship is not a megastar, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Even Mekhi Becton was not a superstar at right guard. Pretty good. And I think that that's something the Vikings have to really put a lot of emphasis in for this free agent class is if you have an above average guy at every other position, and then you have those megastars like Grenard, Darisaw, and Jefferson in place, then you got your quarterback here. I think that gives you a chance to compete with just about anybody. So that's the type of player they can look for. And that's like a Carlton Davis or what, right? Or a DJ Reed. Those guys are not Patrick Surtain. They're not winning MVP, but they're pretty darn good. And DJ Reed was a part of a ton of good defenses as one of the top corners, both in San Francisco and with the New York Jets. So when there's that kind of guy everywhere on your roster above average, and then you have your superstars, that's what you're trying to look to chase down. Enigma says Will Fries had an overall PFF grade of 86.9. Excellent run blocker. Well above average. He broke his leg, but he's 26. Yeah, the thing about that PFF grade is that it's in like 200 something snaps. And his bigger PFF grade from the year before was in the 60s. That's why I would want to use the larger sample, as he is someone who's come along, but there's not a lot of examples of him being like a needle mover. Now, what I take him as an above average player who could be ascending, as you mentioned, because he's 26. Yes. Oh, of course he's on the list, but that tiny sample of playing really well, I wouldn't make that my expectation for him. And I also wouldn't make that my price for him. Jax Park says, have you heard of the rift between Keith Carter? This is the assistant offensive line coach, and Mekhi Becton is so bad that it would take Becton off the list. Yes. I mean, I've seen that said. I don't know Mekhi Becton. I haven't asked Mekhi Becton if it would take him off the list, but if there's a rift between him and this guy, then yeah, I would not expect him to sign here. And I saw Taylor Lewan said something about him. It is a little concerning. It is a little concerning because the Vikings, the best thing they have going for them, other than having Justin Jefferson and like a quarterback on a rookie contract and, all that, is their franchise culture. Their franchise culture is so fantastic that everyone wants to be here. And you're introducing someone to the environment with at least discussion in the past of players not wanting to work with that person. That's not something the Vikings have on their staff. You go through guy by guy, the coaching staff. I mean, look at someone like Keenan McCardle. Justin Jefferson went to Kevin O'Connell after Mike Zimmer was fired and said, don't get rid of Keenan McCardle. Like, that's how much that guy's loved. And I think you could tell the appreciation. And some people have asked me, should they get rid of Chris Cooper? And I'm like, I think last year overall, they were maybe the 15th best line by PFF, which is better than their talent suggested after Darisaw went down. So I've had no real problem with him. Maybe I would have changed run game coordinator or put a little more emphasis into something like that. But even then, the relationships have been very strong. You'd like it to stay that way. I don't know that it's not going to go that way, but if there's evidence in the past that he hasn't gotten along with some players, then that's a little bit of a concern. Matthew just says, Gray Zabel. I agree. Gray Zabel is a potential option for them at guard. North Dakota State guy. Some of those guys have worked out. I do think that would take a little more development. That's what I'm talking about with the development for the guards that they bring in, unless it's the first rounder. If it's a third rounder, then you want that guy to have an opportunity to show you what he can be and to grow rather than throwing him into the fire like they have with so many other guys, and it hasn't worked out. Let's see. Anyone want to trade an offensive lineman for Sam Darnold? No one wants to trade an offensive lineman. I can tell you that. No one wants to trade an offensive lineman. Wrigley says DJ Reed gave up on his team. Well, who was his team? The Jets? I'm not too judgy with that. Everybody else gave up on that team too. They were the one team that graded an F in ownership. Enigma says, I'd say get Holland from Miami to fill the safety spot. Crafty and the best player drafted by Flores. I love that idea. I really do. even if they were to keep Cam Bynum, the safety spot is so important in this defense that spending a ton of money on it's not crazy because they do so much with the safety spot. You've seen it with Metellus and with Harrison Smith, and Smith's up at the line and then he's back and he's making all these calls and changing coverages and all those things. Holland's a difference maker. And if they could bring him in, if he's got a good relationship with Flores, then that is the type of guy that I would be looking for. Absolutely. But PFF projected him to get 19 mil a year, which is a lot for a safety. Matt says Drew Dahlman and Kevin Zeitler, no need to panic. Dahlman and Zeitler are more reasonable and good quality players to go after. Trey Smith being gone, meh, don't care much. Oh, Matt, now you say you don't care that much, but if Trey Smith signed here, you would have lost it. You would have loved it. You would have bought a Trey Smith jersey, got a Trey Smith tattoo. You would have spray painted "Welcome Trey Smith" on your house. I see your point. Dahlman is a real run blocking guy, not as much on the pass blocking side. And that was something that I was talking with Brandon Thorne, offensive line expert, about the other day. And he felt like with Garrett Bradbury, it's going to be hard to find a big improvement in terms of pass blocking, even though we all know that he's not an above average pass blocker. So I have been kind of thinking about that. Is Drew Dahlman going to be that big of an improvement? Maybe in the run game. In the run game, they need to be better, but maybe he could play guard. I don't know. But Zeitler is definitely an option. There's a few of them. Fries has been brought up. I think that it's fine to put money into multiple guys and not like have your heart broken because Trey Smith is not here. Matt says, any steam on this Ty Robinson kid as a DT? Seemed like he tested really well and had 7 sacks last year, but he was ranked last on PFF's big board at DT. So is he the one that had the crazy jump? Was he the one that had the crazy jump? Oh, yeah, right? He is, right. Yeah, he's the guy that had the insane jump and also a wild 40 time, or a really good 40 time for his size. So guys like that to me are always worth the later round draft pick, where you cannot believe the way that they performed at the combine, but they might not have an NFL caliber skill set. So maybe could you develop something? But we've also seen the Vikings go after that type of player. Now, if you had 7 sacks, like you've got my attention, but I'm definitely not drafting somebody off of a high jump and off of a 40 because I've just seen too many times where the Vikings were like, he's going to be the next Danielle Hunter. And it just doesn't work that way. You can develop guys from the DT spot and rusher, but I've also really come to feel like if you want to get a good one, they have to be massive, they have to be freakish, but they also have to be smart and skilled. That DT position is a very detailed position that also requires you to be extremely technical in a very, very short amount of time. That ball is snapped and you got to be in the right spot in an eye blink. There's no defensive end, I'm going to put on a swim move and I'm going to like create some space. It's like you snap and you go. And so you have to understand exactly what you're supposed to do on every play. You have to have a lot of skill. The hands are really important. We don't give those guys enough credit for that stuff. We always go, he's a freak. It's like, well, he's also a technical freak as well. If that guy's not that, then, I don't know, maybe it's a later round pick, but maybe he is. I haven't really seen him play. I saw in Nebraska a couple times, but he didn't pop to me. Jax Park, the last Pro Bowl made by the Vikings drafted interior lineman was Randall McDaniel 26 years ago. It's been so bad, dude. It's been so bad. I mean, but why has it been so bad? And a lot of it is because it's always been the same story. Move a tackle to guard, try to develop some rando, take a 4th rounder. And they did try a 2nd rounder with Ingram and a 2nd rounder with Cleveland. Although I always thought, why not ever try Ezra Cleveland at tackle? But they end up with Christian Darrisaw. So all's well that ends well there. It's just, when it comes to that position, it feels like the one thing that they haven't tried is really bringing in somebody who's a big time free agent. Now, Alex Boone was close to that in 2016. And if you look at his numbers now, you go back, Alex Boone was considered a bust signing for the Vikings. Go back and look at his pressure numbers allowed. I think he allowed like 20 pressures or something that year, and their guards ever since have allowed double. And Josh Klein was kind of a big signing, but not really. They haven't really invested what they need to invest in that guard position. But that's a crazy stat, man. That is a crazy stat. Nathan's Variety Hour. Is there any player you'd realistically trade up for like we did with Turner last year? The one player, and I was listening to him talk today at the Combine, is Will Johnson, is somewhat interesting to me because Will Johnson last year, like going into 2024, was considered like, this is going to be the guy. It's going to be top 3 corner off the board, top 10 draft pick. He's lanky. He's a playmaker. He's got everything. And then he got the injury, and it feels like the buzz has died down for him a little bit. And in past years, even like Terry and Arnold, Joey Porter Jr., we've seen some of these corners drop into the late first round. So I don't know, maybe Will Johnson will drop. But if they thought this is a player, if he gets to number 20, that we have to go get no matter what because he's a top 10 player on our board, that would be someone I might look at. But there's so many defensive tackles. It has to be in a scarce position, because there's so many defensive tackles that you're just going to wait for your guy. There's at least another guy around the corner. Maybe if it was a guard, but you're not trading up for a guard. That would be, remember when the Jets did that for Elijah Vera Tucker? Very questionable to trade up for a guard. So no, I have a tough time thinking that would be something they do unless it was for the cornerback position. It was the one guy that they really wanted, and that was the apple of their eye. But I don't know if that's the main position they're looking at. Fake Ninja something. Shopping the value and budget aisle for guards is what the Vikings have done for 15 years. So I don't think that people are saying that are okay with them not getting Trey Smith. I don't think anyone's saying that you're shopping in the budget aisle. It's that you're shopping in the next tier down, the quality starter aisle. That's what Will Fries is. That's what Kevin Zeitler is. That's what Brandon Scherff is. I've been mentioning their names because they're sort of at the top of my mind, but there's probably 7 to 10 of those. If Jonah Jackson hits the market, 7 to 10 of those guys who are just quality guards that could start for you that are going to be a lot better than Blake Brandel. That's what you're really looking for. You're not looking for the bargain bin. Not this time around. Tyler says, mine is Smith and Becton. Fries is the last above average right guard in free agency. You mentioned the Fries likely to be overpaid. If you're Minnesota, would you be willing to overpay him? Yeah, I think you would be willing to be overpaying him. Maybe like 15 million or 14 million, something like that. Let me pull up the list. I don't have the list in front of me. Free agents. And what is, let's see. Because, okay, Macari is also another guy that we need to talk about because he is listed on overthecap.com, Patrick Macari from the Ravens. He's listed as a tackle, but he's played guard plenty in his career, and that's really what he actually is. So let me look at the guards here again for the 1,000th time, so I've got him more in my head. Sheriff is definitely one of them. Aaron Banks from the 49ers is a physical player. Tevin Jenkins is an above-average player. Lucas Patrick is kind of a long time, just a guy type of starter. And then Brady Christensen has been injured, but has been a good player. Will Hernandez, Will Fries. So these are all guys, and James Daniels, all guys. Daniels got a pretty bad injury that could have potential to be, and Jonah Jackson, if he gets released, I would say average to above average starters. Matt Pryor from the Bears had a good season last year overall. There's enough that you could make an argument for getting 2 of them and putting together a pretty solid line, because it's usually about the weak links, and they've just had weak links everywhere on the interior. But Fries is the top guy, so I think you would be willing to go somewhere in the 15 range. I wouldn't go in the Robert Hunt 20 range. That seems like too much. Wade says, Matt, did you sense an impact on the free agent market when the new cap number was announced? Yes and no. I mean, I think it has some impact, but I don't think that all of a sudden everyone said, oh, wow, like now we've got so much money because everybody else got more money, and it does even things out. But it does also make some situations a little easier to afford players that you have already. It makes certain big contracts look a little better, a little more manageable to the future. So I think there's some impact, but it's not giganto. Macho Meach, did you run into the legend Chris Thompson at the combine? Yes, I had a I had a milkshake with Chris Thomason last night. Yep. Steak and Shake in Indianapolis. Went over there and reminisced about our old memories covering the team together. Yep. That was a pretty good time. Chris is doing well covering the Denver Broncos. Nano Joe says, how risky is it to move back and lose out on one of the better D-line or O-line? That's hard to figure out because it depends on what positions they're expecting the other teams to take. One thing that I've learned over the years is that teams know where guys are going really well. They really have a good sense for what other teams are doing, much better than the mock draft community. They really have a strong sense for which teams are targeting which players. So they should have an idea by the time they get to the draft. Is there going to be tackles? Is there going to be wide receivers who are taken in those spots to where they weren't going to target them anyway? Now, if it's, for example, just right now, the only pure guard that we're talking about, and Gray Zabel might be considered this. I don't know how they look at Gray Zabel, but just follow with me. There's really only Tyler Booker that's a pure guard. That's all he plays is guard. And he's the only one who's considered to be that back end of the first round type of pick. If that's the guy you really want, you really need, then go for it. But, if you listen to Chris Trapasso from CBS Sports, when we talked about the guard position, he thinks there's a few tackles that will play guard in the NFL. He likes the guy Jackson from Ohio State who played more guard this year and is listed as a tackle by PFF, but is more of a guard. Zabel, I think, is listed as a tackle, but he's more of a guard. So maybe there are more options of players that they like. The risk just varies. As far as if you're talking about historically, I have always felt, and trust me, every analysis ever of the draft finds that the number one pick is more valuable than number two, which is more valuable than number 3 and 4. But I always have thought of it in tiers, as in the first 5 picks, these guys have by far, runaway, the best chance to become Hall of Famers. And then the next level down, your expectation is stars, potential Pro Bowlers. That's the ceiling on those players. You get past that, you're looking for starters, good players. Maybe one of them hits. If you look at most drafts from 15 to 30, it's starters. It's not anywhere near the number of superstars as it is at the very top. But I also think from somewhere in that 25 range, 24 to the early second round is very similar. And it's all about, some teams take high ceiling guys. Some teams take players that are considered lower ceiling, but a higher hit rate. And it's all dependent on need. So there's a lot of moving parts there. In general, though, I think it's the best place in the entire draft to move back is from 24 to 35, somewhere in that range. So I would not be that afraid of the risk, especially when you'd be happy with 3 or 4 different positions. You'd be happy with Booker. You'd be happy with Harmon. You'd be happy with Will Johnson if he falls, or the next best corner. If that's the case, if you have even grades on those guys, then that's when you do it. Jax Park, the interior O-line is such a weak link that I wouldn't be opposed to trading back to the second round to take 2 interior offensive linemen in the first 3 picks. Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from with that. Like, there's so much desperation from Vikings fans and probably 15 to 18 other fan bases in the league to get better guards. One thing is they need to work around it better. The guards are going to get beat no matter who you have. But another thing is finding fit. I think it's a numbers game as well. I mean, I don't know about spending all your draft picks on it when you've got these other needs, but as far as, okay, sign one guy who's considered a big fish and then 2 more guys that can compete for the job, and then draft a guy in the 3rd round and just throw numbers at that position and see what sticks, because I think it's a hard thing to figure out in free agency, in the draft. You take an Ed Ingram, you hope. You take an Ezra Cleveland, you hope. It just doesn't work out. But the thing about offensive line is in the draft, and this is why it's so risky to draft a guard. I think it's risky to draft a guard and tackle too. Offensive line is risky Because if you draft a wide receiver and he's not that good, you can play him in a part-time role and then take him off the field. And you're going to have a pretty good sense very fast what he can do, where he can fit in your offense. With offensive linemen, they need so much development, and it's so much harder to play in the NFL that you can't bring them along slowly. You have to play them every single snap. I mean, some people have asked, could you rotate? Like, no, you really can't, because your offense stays out there. And yeah, I mean, you just can't have fat guys running in and off the field all the time. Your offensive line has to have continuity, communication, all those things. If you have a bad but developing guard who you're not sure will ever become good, you just keep getting beat every week until what happens? Like, that's the Ed Ingram conundrum. It's like he had enough talent to be on the field, but was not consistent enough to be good. And they just had to keep playing him to find out. And they kept getting beat, and Kirk Cousins' ribs get cracked. And what I was like, what are we doing here? But that's the fear about drafting them, I think, versus if you go into free agency and you get one in a free agent, it's still got unpredictability, but you have a big sample of that guy playing in the league. You know what he can do. Tyler says, part Commander's question, has Jonathan Allen generated trade interest at the combine, or is it more likely he gets cut? Would the Vikings be interested in signing a 30-year-old pass rushing interior D-line? So his recent history is not great. He had a 3-year run where he was one of the best players in the league. And I mean, at that position, just a dominant pass rusher, top 20 in pressures every year, high PFF grades. But then in 2023, his grades for his all-around game really sunk, but he was still good at pass rushing. The last year he gets hurt. If they cut him and the Vikings came in at 1 year, $7 million, like a Marcus Davenport type of deal, okay, that's fine. That's totally fine. But his current contract, I don't think anybody's trading for that. I do not think that anybody is trading for that at all. I mean, maybe they will, but I would be very surprised. When I looked at his contract, I was like, no. I really don't think that anybody is going to actually make that deal. Some of you mentioning Matt Burke made the Pro Bowl. Yeah, I thought he said guard, but maybe he said interior offensive line. Either way, we all know they didn't have too much in recent years. No, Willie Beavers. Yeah, Oli Udo, Ingram, Dakota Dozier, Tom Compton, Drew Samia. It has just been miserable. Not Now says, have you ever seen a team's draft board to see how they do? So the Dallas Cowboys had a run of years where they accidentally tweeted out their draft board. So I've seen that. I cannot say the Vikings have ever shown us their draft board. I definitely have not ever seen theirs, but the Dallas Cowboys on several different occasions, either accidentally or accidentally on purpose, tweeted out their draft board in the background of pictures and stuff. And as far as how they do, here's what I do know from just knowing people. Maybe I should keep up the bit. If you guys watched any of the videos from the combine, I kept leaning in and saying in the league every time I talk to somebody in the league. So maybe I should keep that up. But when I've talked to people in the league about the success or failure of scouts, the thing about scouting and draft boards and all that is, well, they're not trying to necessarily pick out these players will work for whatever other team. They only do a draft board for themselves. And in a lot of instances, teams don't have 400 players up on the draft board. They have, here's players that we're interested in this spot, that we have whittled down this whole group that we think could be worth that pick and that could be a fit. And then we have in our next pick, and then our next pick, and the UDFAs, and here's the bunch. And then a lot of times around the NFL, they will have the scouts say, hey, this is the guy that I like the most for day 3. This is my one guy I'd like to see you pick. And they'll pick the guy that your scouts like. So as far as how accurate it is in terms of who works out, they don't make the draft board like a draft analyst who's trying to figure out who's going to work out. They make it for themselves. Corey says, how much do you think the hire of Keith Carter impacts the O-line decision to come or to avoid to Minnesota? I guess we're going to find out. I don't want to say, based on just reports from what's come out of the Jets, that it's a bad person, it's someone who's going to ruin their culture and whatever else. What I would say is that when there are things that are said about someone from the past in multiple different spots, you do wonder if that reputation is going to matter. I don't think there's enough evidence to say, well, this guy is going to keep everybody from signing here. But if he keeps one player from signing here because of reputation, then what a mistake that was in terms of hiring him. But he's been in the league and he's worked with teams like Tennessee that had good running games. And sometimes things don't work out between one player and one coach. But so I don't want to dismiss it because there is things that are out there. But I also don't want to say, yeah, this assistant O-line coach is going to destroy everything that the Vikings have built. Let's not go too far with that. JP, so we're going to have to see how it plays out. But if we hear that, if that comes out, then it's a major problem. If it comes out, if we hear that certain guys aren't considering Minnesota because of their assistant offensive line coach, then what are you doing? But we don't really know that. It might just be conflicts with certain players. I don't know. That happens. JP says Drew Dahlman should be our top priority if he hits free agency. Run blocker, could be a game changer in the run blocking. They kind of already have a run blocking center, but he's not an impose your will guy. Like I think Dahlman is more of that type of range. They need difference makers in the run game as much as they need pass protectors, maybe even a little more so because they were so bad at that spot. So yeah, I mean, that's another name that gets thrown out there that's not Trey Smith. That could be an improvement. Tyler, did you get the sense at the combine from that the Vikings coaches and execs are higher on Dwight McGlothern, Levi Drake Rodriguez, or Michael Juergens than the fan base? That did not come up. Those guys did not come up in the conversations at the combine because those are the last players on the roster at this point. But just in general, when you have UDFA, seventh rounder, those players aren't part of any discussion. They're just not. And if they pop and they become great, well, then that's amazing. If Josh Metellus as a 6th round draft pick, if that player suddenly arrives at your doorstep and he can play, or an Ivan Pace, well, that's fantastic. But when you're talking about like 7th rounders that you drafted and started to develop last year, they're just not, you're not going to say like, oh, well, we don't need to sign a corner because this UDFA we saw a little in camp will be fine. Like, that's just not going to work that way. Those guys are bonuses. They're not players that you really treat as foundational unless they've shown it. Evan says, should they move Walter Rouse to guard? I believe they should. I believe they should cross-train him as a swing type of player, but I do think they should start training him as a guard and then see if they've got something there, because more likely than not, there's going to be some one-year deals here. It's like maybe you sign Will Fries for a multi-year deal, but when it comes to the other position, maybe you need to sign somebody for 1 year and have a development option behind it. But Rouse ain't playing left tackle, and he's talented. I really liked what I saw from him in pass protection last year at tackle, so I think they should do that. Nathan's Variety Hour says, I don't know why it's so hard for Kwesi in the draft. My PFF mock draft sims, I always end up with plenty of picks. You're right about that. And, I will say, I'm just saying that in 2020, I think that was when PFF built its mock draft simulator. I did one live on the radio back when I used to have a radio job. And I got Michael Pittman Jr. and Jalen Hurts and also Xavier McKinney in the same draft. So, but I didn't pick Justin Jefferson because the PFF simulator didn't think he was going to drop. I would have picked Justin Jefferson. As far as Searles goes, Jeremiah Searles, we are going to do a show soon. When the combine is all completed, we're going to do like a combine recap. All right, let's bring in to the show, especially because my voice is failing now and I need some Diet Dr. Pepper, but also he's prepared some great stuff. Our intern at Penn, Clay Petrie, Clay's Corner. We wrap up every live show now with Clay's 5 headlines. Some people said they're more like questions and not as much headline. Don't worry about it. It's just 5 things that Clay the intern prepared for me. So, how are you, Clay?
I'm good. It's nice to be back after a small break, but I'm excited to get into these headlines. And the first one I have for you is about the NFLPA team report cards. Obviously, those were released. What were the biggest things that stuck out to you about these grades, and what category would you like to see them add to it?
Also, if you want to keep asking questions, you can. I'll jump in and answer questions as well as Clay's headlines because I just do everything around here, Clay. Yeah, I mean, Monday, I'm just grinding out at restaurants, talking to people, and you're just like doing your homework on Monday. So anyway,
just doing my homework.
Just trying to graduate from an Ivy League school like a dweeb as opposed to grinding football like me. So the NFLPA survey has been transformational for people like myself because you try to take the temperature of the franchise. You try to get a sense for how good is the culture, how well is the coach leading the franchise, how good is the ownership, what should we really think? But when somebody comes out there and does an anonymous survey with the players and just tells you everything, it is so enlightening. And Gazinkad brings up that the Bengals got a F- for the handling of players. I was like, what do they do to those people to get an F-? Because the Vikings got an A+ for their handling of families, which of course will be something that's attractive to potential free agents. I think that's been big for the Vikings. In fact, I think it's been huge for the Vikings because it's right there on paper now. I mean, yeah, okay, you could text your buddy, hey, what's it like to play for the Vikings? You might say, I like it. But now you can go, their players all voted anonymously. And some of them, and you might think, well, the players, they don't want to criticize their ownership or so. Oh, no, there's owners getting Fs. There's owners getting Ds. There's leadership. The Cardinals are a disaster in this type of thing. And so I think it's really kind of been a reputation meter. But for me, it's also been, I'm just really fascinated by what these players think of their teams. What did you look through it? Did you have any that stood out to you? I mean, the Bengals one is hysterical. I mean, what do they? They make them walk through shards of glass to get to the stadium. What do you got to do to get an F-?
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing over there in Cincinnati, but something else that I saw funny was seeing the Cowboys get an A grade for their head coach. And a lot of it was because of the players buying into Mike McCarthy and everything he's doing. And then Jerry Jones went and let him go. And it's kind of just funny to see how that works out. And then Jerry Jones, Cowboys ownership got a B grade. And that was shocking to me because he's out here blinding his own players for aesthetic purposes and then always is in the media saying something. So I know if I played for him, I would be sick of him. So I'm shocked he got a B. But something else that stood out to me were the Dolphins. They've been first in this list 7 out of 11 times. And I'm wondering when they're going to turn them into wins. It's like if the players believe that they have everything in place to put their best out onto the field, like what's holding them back?
Well, Tua keeps getting hurt, I think is probably a main part of it. It doesn't matter how nice your franchise is. If your quarterback gets injured, I think Tua and his actual talent should be a lot more respected after watching backups go in there and struggle and struggle and struggle. It's not like anybody can go in there like kind of it was in San Francisco with Jimmy Garoppolo to Brock Purdy and so forth. And even Darnold played well for San Francisco, but it's a little different there with Miami. I mean, I think with something like that, you're right that you do wonder, like, hey, your culture is so great, or teams that cultures are apparently bad, they keep winning. How about the Steelers getting a D for ownership? I was really shocked by that because they're always held up as like, these are the Steelers owners. They go back to the time that a football was invented. And yet they're not really impressing the people in the locker room. I had the same thought about McCarthy, that the players must have appreciated the way he dealt with all the adversity from last year. The Cowboys got all their defensive players hurt right off the bat. And if you take Trayvon Diggs and Micah Parsons off of a defense, you're probably not going to be as good. Maybe some of them just felt bad for him because it's not fair the way that he was treated. And I've also had, when I did one time, just kind of for fun, like a coach ranking or somebody asked on a mailbag, how would you rank the coaches? And I thought, well, it's kind of hard to do just number 1 through 32 with coach rankings. So let me kind of put them in. Here's the Hall of Fame legends that everyone would take. Here's the up and comers I think are really good. And I had to put McCarthy in his own tier because I could never figure out. I mean, the guy has won so much in his career. His winning percentage is fantastic. He's got a Super Bowl, all that stuff. And yet people think he's like a buffoon. And it's always been odd that way. And then he does kind of buffoonish things sometimes. Players do seem to like, I don't know. It's a little weird, but it is fascinating. You could spend all day breaking down this NFLPA thing. Question from Steve about Kwesi and the contract thing. The best I could do for you there is just to say that there was nothing enlightening about his contract situation. That's the best I can do. There were things that were a little bit different at the combine than they were before, and I don't want to get into it, but just in terms of availability and stuff like that. So I did not get anything new for you, and I'm sure you would have seen it from other reporters if it was out there about Kwesi adofo-mensah's contract. I did say if there's nothing by the combine, I will scratch my head. I am scratching my head. I am. I don't know what's happening there and if it means something or not. I mean, they've got a long time to negotiate the contract. He's still under contract. It's not like they have to get it done or he leaves. But when Schefter reports that they're working on it and then it doesn't happen quickly, it's a bit strange. Or he might have it done and just not be telling anyone because they don't have to announce it. So I really don't know. I really don't have a good answer for you there. It's going to be a question, I'm sure, all the time on the show from fans until it gets done. And I'll do my best. But I had kind of thought like it was going to be something that was announced at the combine or whatever, or we would get an answer. But unfortunately, I apologize. There is no answer. What else you got, Clay?
Yeah. So for my second question, it's been reported that the NFL or a team in the NFL is trying to ban the tush push officially. And I know this conversation has been going on for years now, but what are your thoughts about the play and then the mentality about the team who wants the play banned?
Okay, Clay, it's not just a team. It's the Packers. So what we need
I didn't want to speculate, but
well, it did come out that it's the Packers.
Okay.
So what we need to do is make fun of them.
For sure, yeah.
Come on, Packers. Oh, you can't run your power toss, Vince Lombardi. Sorry. What was it? What is the famous play? It's something like that. Lead toss. What? No. Vince Lombardi. It was working too good. You know what they should have banned? Frickin' Rodgers when he was so good. Rodgers, he's throwing it too fast. Rodgers is throwing it too fast. That's not allowed. You got to cut that out, Rodgers. I mean, Reggie White. Reggie White was just throwing people. Well, they got get that off the field. Come on, Packers. The Packers have had all sorts of things that in the past have worked really well for them, and no one ever asked to ban them. Sorry that it works for the Eagles, but here's what about that why I could never argue for banning it. It doesn't work for everybody else. QB sneaks have always worked. I did a story. It's one of my favorite. Settle in. I'll tell you a little story, Clay. One of my favorite articles that I ever wrote was about quarterback sneaks in 2018 because the Vikings were going to play the Patriots, and the Patriots had this unbelievable record of QB sneaks. They did it the exact opposite. So the Eagles load up everybody. The Patriots spread it out. You can go back and look at Tom Brady. If you go to YouTube and like Tom Brady rushing touchdowns, you'll see them do this. They'd get to the goal line and they'd put 5 guys out and then just run a sneak. So everybody's spread out and there's no one in the box and they just run a sneak and score. So we used to have these conference calls with the opposing coach where the media would just get on the phone with Bill Belichick or McCarthy or whoever else and just ask him questions. And so me thinking Belichick is kind of famous for loving to get in the weeds with random stuff, right? So I thought I'm going to write about this incredible record of their QB sneaks. And I asked Belichick, I was like, you convert them at such a high percentage. Like what's the difference? What's the key to that? And he just goes, execution. And then it was dead silence for like 45 seconds. And no one said anything. It was just like, should we give him a minute? And he said something else after that. Like even he got awkward and said something else. But the only thing I included in the story was that Bill Belichick said execution as far as what, but look, the Bills tried it and they didn't get it. And so I just, yeah, that's funny, Matt. It should be illegal for Antonio Freeman to catch it off of somebody's back. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's soft from the Packers, and you always have the option of stopping it. The one thing they have to make sure they do is the Eagles, I think, just grab people down there. And I also, there was a story Caitlin Kaler did about how Jason Kelsey, when he was doing it, he would take the ball and he would move it forward. And then it was like, wait a minute. Now that, I think they need to litigate it a little more from a referee standpoint of what they're actually doing down there. And are they jumping off side? Are they actually going before the snap and all that stuff? But yeah, I think they should ban Josh Allen. He's too hard to sack. Just come on, man. It's just so freaking weak. And as far as the Kwesi extension thing, I just like, there's a bunch of different ways we could speculate, and I just don't know. And I'll do my best. I don't want to throw a bunch of stuff out there and then have it not be right. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But that's my take on it, Clay. I think that the Packers are being soft, kind of embarrassing themselves. And I'm sure they didn't want that getting out who the team was that was trying to do it. It's like, oh, you're not Packery enough, huh? Too soft, like a little melted piece of cheese in the middle. Is that your problem?
Yeah, the Packers definitely need to man up. Like, you had 30 years of top tier quarterback play, and all of a sudden you're finally, the division caught up to you, and now you're looking to complain about something else, and it's just frustrating coming from them. And I think if you don't love the tush push, you can't say you love football. It is punch you in your mouth. Everyone in the stadium knows what you're about to run, and it still doesn't matter. And it's one of my favorite plays of football, seeing no receivers out there actually except to push the quarterback. So I think it's great. Packers, get over it.
I just like in general innovation in football, and it's funny that it's not innovative. It's something they would have done in 1920, but even then, the fact that they can, as you mentioned, like this at the heart of this sport is we're moving the ball forward 10 yards at a time. And if that's how you can do it, then that's how you do it. There's nothing that you can find football-y that they're doing illegal on that play, except for at one time you weren't able to push the person from behind, I think, in the NFL. That was a rule at one time, but now you are able to do it. So maybe if they said you're not able to do that anymore, I guess I would understand, but it just seems like everyone's just mad that Philly's doing it better. And at some point they won't. Like at some point they'll have people injured or their guys will get older, and I don't know. So anyway, okay, what's next?
Yeah, while we're on the Packers, they're reportedly open to trading Jair Alexander, and this adds his name to a long list of superstars who are expected to be moved this offseason. If you could trade for one superstar on the market right now and add them to the Vikings, who would it be? But you can't say Myles Garrett.
Yeah, obviously Myles Garrett would be number one. So who's our list? Let's see. You got now I would be intrigued by, and I'm assuming that we're just throwing salary cap out of just don't even worry about that part of it. I would be intrigued by Deebo Samuel on the Vikings, because as good as they are at number 1 and 2 wide receiver, they're not that good at number 3 wide receiver. Jalen Naylor had a nice year. He kind of had the year that they were waiting for, which was him as a downfield threat. But the thing that they're really missing is somebody to just get the ball quickly to, who can break tackles and make plays. Now, there's a bunch of nuances there. There's his contract. There's the fact that Deebo Samuel would not be happy being wide receiver 3. He was already really teed about being wide receiver 2 to Brandon Ayuk, it seemed, after Ayuk passed him. And he's probably broken, and he's not what he was a couple of years ago when he was all pro. All of that aside, if this is a philosophical question, the type of player that I would most want is that, because I think that quick game element, the yards after catch, is something that this team is really missing. Who's your guy?
Yeah, it's funny that you went with Deebo, because I went with Cooper Kupp, because I kind of had the same thoughts about uh, Jettas and then Addison being one of my favorite top duos in the league. But like you said, the three was kind of lacking. And especially if JJ McCarthy is starting next year, it would be great to have the security blanket like cup for him in his first year. It's kind of like what the Bears did with Keenan Allen. It didn't work out for them. He kind of looked like a shell of himself, and I don't know if it was scheme or what happened there, but he didn't. It didn't go as they planned. But I think this move could definitely be the what they intended, what the Bears intended to do, but better.
I think I know the difference between Keenan Allen with Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen with a quarterback who was getting sacked every time he was open. But Keenan Allen and Cooper Kupp are the exact type of example here of someone who could just add this extra layer. I think about every old wide receiver gets this comparison, but Anquan Bolden at the end of his career as a possession guy underneath was really good. Steven brings up T. Higgins. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if he's on the list though. I think the Bengals are just going to keep him, but I know what you're saying there. He's the best player, but as you're talking about guys where teams have given him permission to seek a trade and things like that, there's like this whole list now. And which one would you like? But Cooper Kupp, yeah. And Ryan says Debo's not as good as you think. I'm not saying that he is now. I'm saying that stylistically, if you could just, with no context whatsoever, without the health part, without the contract, you could just bring him in. Can we do a podcast without you getting arrested or without
it's
someone?
Philly, baby.
Where is this college? This pen? Anyway, so, but that's why I said, like, I get all the reasons you wouldn't do that. But if you were telling me the type of player, that's who I would go with. But yeah, with Cooper Kupp, here's the other thing. They don't have any receiver who could block somebody. And Jefferson, I know can, but you really don't want him doing it a ton. You would like to be able to throw a screen and have somebody lay a block, because the number of times they would throw a wide receiver screen and the other wide receiver would miss the block and he just does nothing. So a little bit of grit, a little bit of yak, a little bit of broken tackle ability. I think that would be very helpful to this Vikings offense.
Yeah. Do you think Jair, like, take all, like, I know they're in conference and all that, but take that out of the picture. Do you think he would be a good addition, especially if they can lock up Byron Murphy on the other side, but not overpay for him?
Jair, I think pen is short for penitentiary is what somebody said. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they said you went to Penn, but,
Yeah,
but maybe
I
that's
didn't
what
clarify. Yeah.
maybe that's what this is a good, Gazinkat has a good question here, which is when dogs bark for my guests in the background, they have to make a dog pun. But what can we do for sirens for you?
That's
We're gonna
unfair.
we're gonna have to figure that out. What we can do for you there. I have zero interest in Jair Alexander. He has played so little football. He seems to be problematic for those sirens are from the Eagles fans still getting arrested is very funny. I think what we could do is just have the listeners make fun of you.
I'm okay with that.
Jair, he's
well
just not.
deserved.
Jair's just not the same guy. From 3-4 years ago. It's a hard pass for me because not only is he not on the field much, but he also seems to be problematic for his franchise. Hard pass. I'm going to go with a no.
Yeah, when he ran out for the coin toss, even though he wasn't a captain, it's like, what are you doing? Like, he's clearly, yes, he's a very talented football player, or maybe was a very talented football player, but you could tell he's not one of those guys that are like focused about being one of the greats or stuff like that. And those are the kind of guys I want on my team.
Or kind of a me first. It was that running out. I don't know if you watch The Office, but the Dwight Schrute malfeasance for malfeasance' sake. That's what that was. That was just intentional to cause problems. And that's what we were talking about earlier with this assistant offensive line coach, where you go, you're bringing in somebody that might not fit the culture. That's always going to set up a something up the flag for me or up the pole for me of a little bit of a. That's the totally wrong saying. What am I thinking of? It's going to set off some alarm bells for me. The same thing if they sign somebody like Jair Alexander. Like, Matthew Stafford for 1 year. Yeah, I guess he is included in this. It is a question. Would you rather have Stafford for 1 year or just JJ McCarthy? Stafford is old, but he also is still pretty good.
Would you rather keep Stafford or just have Darnold, or keep Darnold or Stafford?
Yeah. It's probably overrating Stafford, to be honest, but I still would probably take a swing with Stafford. I would take that. I would take one. If you told me that no strings, it's not realistic. The same with Debo. It's like, this isn't realistic. This is philosophical, that I can get Stafford just for 1 year. Then McCarthy starts the rest of his career. I'd be like, all right, I might do that.
Stafford, he's one of those guys where if he gets in the playoffs, he could win every game. And to have a quarterback like that on your team, it's huge, especially with the roster that the Vikings have right now. So, yeah, in a completely hypothetical world, I would like to see that. But for my next headline, every year we see certain top prospects abstain from competing at the combine. How do you feel about this and the players that decide not to show off their talents?
Soft, undraftable. No, this is a player to player type of decision. If you go to the combine and you are injured and trying to grind through just to be at the combine to show you were there, and you hurt your hamstring and you just, that's a bad idea. If you are a top 10 pick already locked in, no reason to go. I don't want to hold it against people. I'm not holding it against Travis Hunter. What does he have to prove? What does he have to do to help himself? He's going to be a top 10 draft pick. But I will say, though, for Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, what are we doing here? Who is it that you think you are? Last year, we saw top 10 quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix, go and throw, and they helped themselves a lot. J.J. McCarthy showed progress from college, and Michael Penix just put on a show. And it was like, okay. And how much different would they have been drafted? I'm not sure. But I thought for Caleb Williams, for Jaden Daniels, for Drake May, okay, these guys are locked in. They're not going anywhere. They don't need to come here and do this. But Penix does need to do his stuff out there and show him how good the cannon is. And McCarthy does need to show his progress. And Bo Nix, honestly, I thought made some money for himself as well because he convinced some people that he actually did have the arm strength to go down the field in his throwing sessions. And you like to see those guys compete. So I guess I would definitely go player to player. If somebody's sitting out who is a fringe first rounder because they just don't want to do it, I don't know, like go compete, go show what you got. It's also a very weird and would you say, is it like, I don't know how to put this. It's weird. Like if you were just to take, we know this happens and we've known it for a long time and it's always been a thing. But if you were inventing a league, would you include this weird thing where guys get in their underpants and run real fast? Like, no, of course not. It's always been strange to me. It's like in an era where players in college are understanding their values better than they ever have. If you're them, shouldn't you be saying like, why do I have to do this? I played for 6 years of football that you can watch. I shouldn't have to go do this for you to draft me. And if that ever became a widespread sentiment and 1 year all the prospects said we're not doing it, well, then it would kill the event pretty much instantly. And it probably is weird, but I also like it. So there's that part. And a lot of players make names for themselves there that would have no chance to stand out otherwise. So I think it's still useful, but it's, if there's somebody like Cam Ward who won't step up and throw the football, what are you afraid of? That's not like you're getting hurt or anything. You're just going out and throwing. Come on, show what you got, man.
I think a lot of people don't realize that most of these players didn't have an off season. They went directly from their college season, finished, and immediately started prepping for combine and pro days. So like a bunch of people are having lingering, nagging small injuries. So if you're nursing one of those, then yeah, like, don't risk it. Wait for your pro day. Let the tape speak for itself. But me, when I was growing up and I played, I used to dream of going to the combine and trying to raise my draft stock because it's one of the rare opportunities where all 32 teams are there looking at you at the same time. And you have the chance to go prove that you're better than the guy next to you. So I don't know, maybe some guys are just wired different and have that drive to just make sure they're clearly the best. And I don't know. I don't really agree with the letting my tape show for yourself. I get where they're coming from, but it's like we're football players, we're competitors. Like go out and compete, show why you're the best. So that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it should not exist. No one should have to do this. They should just be drafted on their tape. And they should do maybe individual workouts if someone wants them to, or if they agree to it, they could do a pro day if they want to. That should be how it is, really. But since it exists, and since it is a place to come compete, I would give extra credit if a guy who's going to be a first rounder, hey, how about the kid from Tennessee, Pierce? He shows up and runs a 4.4 something. I'm like, okay,
In the hoodie.
that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I didn't expect the hoodie to slow him down, a guy that size. But I mean, I'm like, okay, that guy with the production and then competing and then putting up those numbers, like, let's go. Right. So, yeah, I think I don't want to say I would never draft this guy because he's not competing. If like Abdul Carter, what you only can hurt yourself. You've got a little injury anyway. You just don't want to do that. So it really is a kind of a case to case basis for me.
Yeah. Well, let's move past the young guys and let's talk about old fellas because Jason Peters retired at age 43, which is ancient in the football world. So, who is your favorite player who played into their late 30s and 40s and was still good?
My favorite ever was Deion Sanders retired and was just vibing and doing like NFL Network. And I think it was Ray Lewis from the Ravens called Deion, was like, man, we need a corner. Like our defense, we lost some corners. We can still be great. This was Kyle Bowler era, I think. Alexander Wright started a playoff game for them and basically had no career whatsoever and may have come very close to winning that playoff game. Anyway, so Deion's just like, all right, fine. I'll come back. Sure. Yeah. I think he was 39 or 41 or something and just came back with the Ravens and was honestly awesome with the Baltimore Ravens with all those great defensive players. I think Suggs was there. Ray Lewis was there, that great D-line. And here's Deion Sanders just going out and making plays at this super old age, because if somebody keeps playing until their late 30s and isn't good, it's just sad. And it's like, oh man, it went too far. There's a lot of quarterbacks. Matt brings up Vinny Testaverde. There's a lot of quarterbacks who kept it going. I think Josh McCown played in his first playoff game. I want to say it was like 39 or 38 in his entire career when Wentz got hurt and he came into that playoff game with the Eagles. So journeyman quarterbacks who play until they're 40, of course, are favorites of mine. But in terms of someone doing something totally random, like coming back out of retirement and playing great, that's incredible. That's just an incredible feat. It shows you how Deion Sanders is a once in a lifetime type of athlete who played Major League Baseball and played in the NFL in the same weekend, in the World Series, no less, and then decided, yeah, I'll just get up off my couch, off the TV set and go play. And then he did it. That's so cool.
Yeah. Deion Sanders is one of those like mythical creatures in sports where it just doesn't make sense. How are you that fast? How are you that athletic? How can you play both sports? And then he could go coach too. All right. But someone who's like on the opposite spectrum of him in terms of like natural talent that I really loved was Larry Fitzgerald. He played until his late 30s, and I modeled my game after him when I was a kid because he not only was he such a likable dude, he never said anything wrong. I don't remember any media allegations, but the man just never dropped passes. If you threw it to 11, you knew he was going to catch it. And he was one of the most clutch players ever. I forget the year, but the Packers versus Cardinals when Aaron Rodgers had like 2 Hail Marys. People forget that Larry Fitzgerald took that game over and just absolutely dominated. But another guy I was thinking about, I kind of want to stay away from quarterbacks, but Brett Favre. During his career, I hated him because I like the Bears, and he was torching us every year. But after he retired, I was able to like step back and reflect, and he just made football so fun. And it wasn't just the fact that he was throwing lasers. I think Brett Favre might have took the biggest hits that I've ever seen a quarterback take. And he took a ton of them, but he was always just get back up and be that gunslinger that he was. So he's got to be one of my favorites.
I think we always, in entertainment of any kind, struggle with this when, let's say, there's a great actor who turns out to be a creepo or something like that. Like, say you love Kevin Spacey, and then you're like, oh no, Kevin Spacey, why? I I don't think you have to go back and be like, I'm never watching those movies again, or I don't want this to be a controversial take. If you don't watch Kevin Spacey movies, that's totally fine. But I look at great athletes like this. Now there's a level to it. There's like an OJ level to it. But with someone like Brett Favre, I think we can separate. Brett Favre made a generation of people love football like he loved football, and that includes me, with Brett Favre, the person who scammed poor people out of a bunch of money, and Brett Favre, who sent a picture to a woman and did terrible things off the field. I think we can put those things aside. The 2009 season, or to different sides of our brain, the 2009 season is one of the most fun things that's ever happened in football. If you were just to make, maybe this will be my next book, the funnest things to ever happen in football. Brett Favre showing up with the freaking Vikings and beating the Packers twice and just having a ball out there is so fun. And it didn't end fun, but it just was so entertaining that I agree. As far as old quarterbacks, watching him in 2009 was the best. Wrigley brings up one of my favorite players that I ever covered, Terrence Newman, who was into his late 30s when I arrived with to cover the Vikings in 2016, and then he played through 2017, and just a wealth of knowledge. That was my first time. 2016 was my first time covering football inside of a locker room. I had covered hockey before, so I did not have the type of knowledge of the other football reporters yet. And Terrence Newman was incredibly nice to me in explaining a lot of things where I could just walk up to him and ask, like, hey, I asked him one time to read one of my articles to make sure I had it right. Like, it was kind of scheme and X and O a little bit. And I was like, did I get this right? And he was nice enough to do that and give me feedback on it. So somebody like that is so cool. And he played great. He switched positions 2017 to play the nickel. That's another thing. Charles Haley was another guy who played late into his career. Bruce Smith with Washington was still getting double-digit sacks. Like a lot of those guys. It's Julius Peppers. Julius Peppers might be one of the best. And every so often, I'm trying to think of a good name for this. Every so often, a guy will just show up with a team and win a Super Bowl or something when he's kind of washed, but he latches on and he contributes just enough and ends up winning a Super Bowl. That's always pretty great too. It wasn't it. I hate to throw this one out there. I think Brian McKinney won with Baltimore, and that was like a former Viking who was kind of washed up. So, that's how it goes. Elshon Jeffrey with Philadelphia, 2017, is kind of a washed up wide receiver, was really good, played for Bears teams, ends up winning a Super Bowl. So, great question. Yeah, there's a lot of those. Darryl Green got brought up. That's yep. So
just a whole bunch of guys who love ball. Anyone
Mercedes
who plays
Lewis.
that late. Oh yeah, Mercedes Lewis.
Still playing. That's crazy. Wade says, boggled that Percy Harvin admitted that he played every game medicated. Yeah, I mean, the things that Percy Harvin was capable of. Percy was talking about a comeback maybe 5 years ago, and I thought that'd be a great idea. I bet he could still play. So great question, great stuff, great questions from you guys. I really had an awesome time at the Combine, and I got a lot of great guests on the show. Make sure you go. I tried to cover every aspect of what is about to happen with the Vikings from a bunch of different people at the NFL Combine. So make sure you go check out those videos. Great stuff, Clay. And go over and check out purpleinsider.football. I'm going to have a mailbag tomorrow, but also in the next couple of days, Clay's going to have a really cool and unique article that pertains to the NFL Combine that he's been working on. So purpleinsider.football, sign up over there for the newsletter, all my written stuff, all off season long, and along with Clay's as well, will be over there. So Clay, thank you for your time. Great job on Clay's Corner tonight. Only one siren in the background, so that's progress. No glitchiness tonight. The video's looking good. The audio's looking good. You weren't bumping into the microphone. Like every time we get 1% better each podcast, Clay. So
comes with the reps.
It's all about the reps. So great job. And we will talk to you all. Nope. I'm supposed to take Clay out, not myself. Hold on. There we go. Okay. We'll talk to you all very soon. Appreciate you guys. Football.